Hi everyone and welcome to the final part of my WitchWood card reviews. We've seen all the cards now. I've got 47 new ones to show you. That's a significant amount, so I'll get straight into it. So I'm going to start with Charmin, and the reason is this card. What a card this is. It's called Shudderwock. It's a legendary Charmin minion that costs 9 mana, has 6 attack and 6 health. But the battle cry is where this really comes to shine, and it's a battle cry of repeat all other battle cries from cards you have played this game. Targets are chosen randomly. Not only are targets chosen randomly, but also the order in which the battle cries are played is also random, which kind of affects things. But it's not very hard to get positive only battle cries. Stonehill Defender, for example, discovers you a minion. You can use Bone Mare, which only affects friendly minions. You can use Saronite Chain Gang, which will summon a copy of the Shudderwock on your side potentially. You can use Zola the Gorgon, which summons a copy of a friendly minion, and of course Zola the Gorgon then means that you could potentially get Shudderwock back in your hand and then replay Shudderwock again. There are so many strong possibilities for this card, and this is one of the reasons why we play Hearthstone, is for these crazy cards which can cause some really good games. This is going to put Charmin right up there, I think. You don't even need to build your deck around this card. You can play this in a strong Charmin deck and just put maybe 4 battle cries in it to make it work. If you're playing this with just Saronite Chain Gang, just that one thing, then it's going to give you a 6 for 9 mana. You're going to get 2 6/6s, which isn't that great. But then when you add just a couple more battle cries on there, it instantly makes it worth playing. Obviously, there will be decks where you can just try and make as many battle cries as you can, and that will be really fun. But I think the most playable ones will be ones that you just target specific battle cries to make this work. But a very strong card, and one that I'm really looking forward to play with. Zap is a 0 mana Charmin spell, and what it does is it deals 2 damage to a minion, and it has overload of 1. So the turn you play it is 0 mana, which is great tempo, but you do overload by 1, so you're effectively paying 1 mana for it. 1 mana deal 2 damage is still pretty good, but is it something that Charmin really wants? I don't think so. Rogue can make use of 0 mana spells because they can activate their combos, and it works really well there. But here, Charmin isn't that great. It does have synergy with overload decks maybe, but it's a solid spell. It's pretty average, I would say, but nothing that you would significantly want to play, I don't think, at the moment. Ghostlight Angler is a 2 mana 2/2 Murloc for the Charmin class. It does have the effect of Echo, but I think this overall is an average card. The Echo effect has some certain uses. It can help with Unite the Murlocs, the Charmin quest, because calling the finishers is rotating out of the game, so this could help with that. It also could go into a Hagatha the Witch deck where every time you play this, you do get a random spell to your hand, so that has certain benefits, but reasonably average. I'm not sure this will see some play. Blazing Invocation is a 1 mana spell for Charmin. It is rare, and what it does is it discovers a battle cry minion. So we've seen some cards like this before in Hearthstone. I Know a Guy was the warrior card, which could discover a taunt minion. Also Finders Keepers was the Charmin card, which could discover a card with overload, and you also had to overload by 1. This one does have some significant uses. It can go into a deck that uses Shudderwock because you're discovering a battlecry minion. It could also be a nice one to get from Hagatha the Witch as a random card, because then you can discover a battlecry minion, play that minion, and then get another spell back with Hagatha the Witch. But I think this isn't that great. If you are playing it in a Shudderwock deck, you'll probably want specific battle cries, so you will put those in your deck already. It's not the sort of effect that I think you desperately need to put this card in to suddenly make Shudderwock even stronger. Not good enough for me, and not one I can see going into many decks at the moment. The Might is a 2 mana rare spell for Charmin, and this card I think is excellent. What it does is it gives a minion +2/+2, and if it's an elemental, add a random elemental to your hand. So this is basically a Mark of Yasharaj for Charmin, and Mark of Yasharaj was very good in Druid. This one, I think, if you're playing an elemental Charmin deck, you will 100% put this in. You can imagine playing Firefly on turn 1, then playing this on turn 2. Your Firefly can suddenly trade into your opponent's minions very well, and also you're getting a random elemental into your hand that you can potentially play later to help with your chain. So I really like this card in an elemental Charmin deck. This is an auto include in my opinion. Next up is Paladin, and starting with Paragon of Light. This is a 3 mana rare minion, It has 2 attack, 5 health, and while this minion has 3 or more attack, it has Taunt and Lifesteal. This card has some good potential. It obviously means that you have to buff this card. Paladin is losing their hand buff cards, so you need to play it onto the board first. So that does kind of give it the downside that you need to play it with another card to make it work. So you can't just play this as a 3 mana 2/5. It's not strong enough just playing it on its own as a 3 mana 2/5. But once you buff it, it does get Taunt and Lifesteal, which can be really good in Paladin class, especially some kind of control Paladin. Spike Ridge Steed would work brilliantly on here. Blessing of Kings is good. Sound the Bells is the new card that they could potentially use here. It does have the downside of if your opponent uses any cards which reduce the attack of this minion, then it will suddenly lose its lifesteal and taunt. So even if it's a temporary effect, they could suddenly bypass your taunt and just go face. So it's an interesting card. Not one that I think is especially great. I think it's probably just above average if you put it in the right deck. If you don't put it in the right deck, then it's pretty much useless. Prince Liam is a 5 mana 5/5 legendary minion for Paladin. It has the battle cry of transform all 1-cost cards in your deck into legendary minions. This is a really cool card, but not one that I think is particularly strong. I don't think you even want to build a deck around it, so you don't want to fill your deck with 1-cost cards and then suddenly play Prince Liam and get loads of random legendaries. I think that will be a fun deck to try. It will be a bit of a meme deck, but it's not going to be very strong. What this card really aims to do, and where it could be most positive, is if you play this on turn 5, you get 5/5 in stats, which is pretty solid, so it's not necessarily a bad play. But then it stops you from top decking your one drops anymore. So if you've survived the early game, top decking a 1-drop later in the game can sometimes not be that great. So transforming them all into legendaries means that you'll no longer top deck them, which is fantastic. The problem is they're random legendaries. They might not synergize with your deck. They might not be very strong. They might be bad legendaries. But I think on the whole, late game, if you're top decking a random legendary, it is better than a 1-drop. So I like this card. I think it's quite cool, but I don't know whether the effect is powerful enough to want to put it into a competitive deck, but I'm definitely going to try it out. Ghostly Charger costs 5 mana, 3 attack, 4 health, is a beast, and it has a Divine Shield and Rush. So this is a Paladin only card. I'm not sure you really need to put rush cards into Paladin, and this one isn't particularly strong. I think it's got certain uses, but it's not that great. The Divine Shield is good because you can rush it into your opponent's minion and it remains on the board undamaged. So that is a very positive effect. The problem is when you're playing this for 5 mana, there aren't going to be many targets you can kill with just the 3 attack. So if you combine it with Sound the Bells, for example, then it can become quite good, and then you gain this powerful minion on the board, which hasn't had any damage yet. But I don't see it being good enough, to be honest. I don't think it will see much play unless you combine it with other cards, because just trading it into your opponent's minion and that minion not dying isn't really good enough, in my opinion, on turn 5. Hidden Wisdom is a new Paladin secret, and of course it costs 1 mana. It's epic, and the secret is after your opponent plays 3 cards in a turn, draw 2 cards. So this is really powerful. To have 1 mana to draw 2 cards is excellent. It's essentially the Rat Trap, but for Paladin. Now, it heavily depends on what sort of decks your opponents are playing. So if on the ladder people are playing lots of decks with Echo cards, for example, or they're playing lots of combo decks where you play a few cards in a turn, then yes, it's very powerful. But if you're playing against a control deck where they're usually only playing 1, maximum 2 cards per turn, then this is never going to activate, and it's just a waste of a card in your turn. Also, it is activated by your opponent, so if they're playing a mill deck, then they can activate this when they want to make you mill cards. Not that I think that will happen too often, but it is a possibility. So a very cheap card with a very strong effect that will really depend on how the meta shapes up, but an interesting one for sure. Warlock next, and first up we've got Curse of Weakness, which is a 2 mana spell. It's rare, it has Echo, and the effect is give all enemy minions -2 attack until your next turn. This is another strong card for Warlock. I don't think they need more strong cards, but they've got one. This fits nicely into a control Warlock deck because The effect lasts until your next turn, which is incredibly powerful. So if your opponent's got a lot of minions on the board and you've got quite a nice board as well, you play this a few times, your opponent's minions can be completely neutralized to 0 attack. You can make some very efficient trades, and not only that, if any of their minions survive, on their next turn they will have their reduced attack from Curse of Weakness, so their trades in the next turn aren't efficient. I like this card. I think it's very strong. Control Warlock's got so many different options. Maybe this one might not be good enough, because maybe an efficient board clear is better to play than Curse of Weakness, but we'll see. I think either way, I think if you put this into a Control Warlock deck, you can make it work. Fiendish Circle is another spell, costs 4 mana this time, and it's common, and it summons 4 1/1 imps. This card isn't very good, unfortunately. I don't know why you pay 4 mana to summon 4 1/1 imps that are very easy to remove. Maybe later on in the game, or when we get new expansions, maybe if there's some demon synergy to go with these imps, it will work, but at the moment, not for me. WitchWood Imp is a 1 mana card. It has 1 attack, 1 health, is a demon. It does have stealth and the death rattle of give a random friendly minion +2 health. So this is kind of like a Blood Imp, but I think it's better than the Blood Imp. So the Blood Imp can obviously stack and keep buffing your minions as you play them, but it often wasn't very difficult for your opponent to kill. This, however, is kind of like a 1 mana 1/1 that you will want to kill. So not only can you trade it in, but it can also give another minion +2 health, which is great. So let's say, for example, on turn 2, you're playing a Vulgar Homunculus. Suddenly you can trade your WitchWood Imp in and you get a 2/6 with Taunt, which is great in the early game for a Control Warlock type deck. It could also work quite well in Zoo, buffing certain cards like your Knife Juggler, for example. Not a bad card, to be honest. A little bit above average, I think, and one that I think can fit into some decks. Dark Possession is another quite promising card for Warlock. It costs 1 mana, it's a spell, which is rare, and its effect is deal 2 damage to a friendly character and discover a demon. This has a lot of uses in Warlock, and discovering a demon can be quite good, because of course you can get a Doomguard or a Void Lord, which we know can be excellent. There are some weaker demons, and potentially it puts demons into your pool of Bloodreaver Gul'dan that you don't want to bring back. But to be honest, I think it could work quite well, and dealing 2 damage to a character, you can do it to your face and upgrade your Spellstone. And it's also Discover, so you do get to choose, and late game you could potentially pick up a big demon to help you get some late game push. So I quite like it. I don't know what deck it specifically fits into, because Cube Lock and Control Warlock won't necessarily want to play it, but I think if you can find a deck that fits it, I think it's quite a positive one, and one that doesn't really have too many downsides. Ratcatcher, another fantastic card for Warlock. It's epic, it costs 3 mana, has 2 attack and 2 health. Its battle cry is destroy a friendly minion and gain its attack and health. So the reason for having this card is you want to kill one of your Death Rattle minions and then gain the stats of that. Very, very strong, especially in Cube Warlock, because if you don't have Dark Pact in your hand, then you can play Ratcatcher to destroy your cube and also gain the stats of that cube. So it's really good, but it's also got Rush, so it helps you control the board that turn. Unfortunately, because it costs 3 mana, you can't play Prince Tal'Daram anymore, which Cube Warlock did potentially do a lot of the time, but I think Ratcatcher is a very good alternative. Another tool for Cube Warlock, which I don't think they really need, but they're going to get. Next up is Hunter, and the first card we're looking at is Carrion Drake. It's a dragon, a rare dragon, costs 5 mana, has 3 attack, 7 health, and it has the battle cry, if a minion died this turn, gave poisonous. Now, that's not really very difficult to do. Minions are always trading in Hearthstone. Hunter especially should have some minions that can trade to activate this. The issue is, does Hunter really want the poisonous effect? Yes, it's nice. Yes, it helps you then to control the board afterwards. But Hunter usually uses cards which go face and can cause some quick face damage, and this isn't that card. It is an interesting card, and maybe if a Control Hunter deck kind of comes out of the meta. But at the moment, I don't really see an issue where it would go, and they don't have very many dragon synergies either. So not a particularly good card at the moment, because I think it's potentially in the wrong class. Vilebrewed Skitterer is a 5 mana, 1 attack, 3 health beast, and it has poisonous and rush. This is not a good card. It's effectively a removal card, a removal spell disguised as a minion, because you play this onto the board, you rush it into your opponent's minion, and that dies. But ultimately, with only 3 health when you're playing it for 5 mana, your Vilebrood Skitterer will die as well. So I don't think this is good enough to see play. Rogue had Assassinate, which was 5 mana, destroy an enemy minion, and that wasn't really good enough. It didn't see a lot of play. And in actual fact, this is worse than Assassinate, because the minion you want to kill could be hidden behind a taunt, one of your enemy's taunts. It could be hidden behind a Divine Shield, and then of course it doesn't die at all. So I don't think this is a good card at all. I don't think it fits into Hunter, and I don't think that they will play it at all. Moving on to Priest, we're starting with quite an interesting minion, which is common. It's called Squashling. It costs 2 mana, has 2 attack and 1 health. It's got Echo, and the battle cry is restore 2 health. So this is effectively using your hero power, restoring 2 health, but also having a 2/1 body to it. So that's pretty good. That's like a pretty decent, and because it's got Echo, you can play it 5 times in a turn. So if you've got lots of minions on the board, being able to restore health to them and gain some extra board control and efficient trades is really, really positive. It also has synergy with the Nausea Cleric, so you can draw potentially a lot of cards. Also can have synergy with Arcanized Soul Priest. If that's on the board, this then deals 2 damage rather than restoring 2 health, so you can then do it to opponent's minions or your opponent's face. I think maybe you'll see this play in some decks, because particularly if you're playing a control priest with lots of high health minions, it does give you that opportunity to make more efficient trades with those minions. So I quite like this one. Nightscale Matriarch is a rare 7 mana minion. It has 4 attack and 9 health, and it is a dragon, which is important for priest. And whenever a friendly minion is healed, it summons a 3/3 whelp. So that's a pretty powerful effect. So usually these sort of cards have summon 1/1 minions or 2/2 minions, but this is a 3/3, which is pretty strong. The issue is that you have to heal minions, so if you don't have any other minions to heal, then you're not going to make it work. Also, this costs 7 mana, so it's very difficult to get other cards to synergize with it on that turn. I did just talk about the Squashling, which works pretty well. You could do this because you can play it with Echo multiple times and summon 3/3s, but the problem is, when you're playing it onto the board, it's not going to die, and you're also summoning a 3/3 whelp, so you can't do it too many times before your board fills up. It is pretty significant that it's a dragon, because Priest is losing Dracnid Operative, which I think is a better card than this one, but it will be important for them to have dragons to still activate their Duskbreakers, which is a really strong card. So maybe this will see play. The problem with synergizing it with Duskbreaker is Duskbreaker would kill all of those 3/3s that you summon. So either way, I think it is a strong card. I don't think it's massively powerful, because I can't necessarily see a priest deck that would want to play it at the moment. But it does have a lot high health for 7 mana, so it might be able to stick around for a turn and be able to get those combos off. Quartz Elemental is another common priest card. It costs 5 mana, 5 attack, 8 health. It is an elemental, and it can't attack while it's damaged. That is a huge downside. So these stats are very strong for a 5 mana minion, so when you play it onto the board, that's pretty strong. But while it being damaged, not being able to attack, I think is pretty much terrible. Priest, of course, can heal it very easily. They can use their hero power, they can use Circle of Healing, they can use the Squashling that I just talked about, all sorts of ways. But the problem is that if it's still damaged outside of range of that healing, you won't be able to attack with it. And your opponent can effectively kill this minion with a 1 attack card that they might have on the board. Very easily just damage it, and then you have to spend 2 mana to make it attack. So I don't think this is good enough to see play in Constructed, really, because the upside of it having more health and being able to survive is offset by the downside of you having to spend mana to heal it back up to make it attack. So you might be able to get it to stick around for a while, but you are spending mana on it to make it continually trade. So Priest does want to do that sometimes, but I don't see this one being strong enough, unfortunately. Divine Hymn is a 2 mana common spell for Priest, and what it does is it restores 6 health to all friendly characters. This is a fantastic spell, one that Priest is going to love, I think. It's 2 mana to restore that much health to all of your minions is fantastic. So often one of the strengths of Priest is just being able to have a minion on the board that will die when you trade it into your opponent's minion, but if you hero power it, it will survive, and that is how they gain a lot of their momentum and a lot of their board control. So now for 2 mana you can do that to all of your minions on the board and restore 6 health, which is a significant amount of healing. It also heals your face as well. So this card I think will see a lot of play. If you're playing a Lady in White deck, you have the incentive to add really high health minions, which we've seen quite a few introduced into the game with the WitchWood. And just combining it with Divine Hymn kind of makes sense because those minions will have a lot of health. They'll be able to take more damage from trades, and then restoring them back to full health means you can get extra value out of them. So I like this card. I think it's pretty strong for Priest, and I will definitely put it in some Priest decks. Moving on now to Mage, we start with a pretty bad card in my opinion. It's called Cinder Storm. It's a rare spell, costs 3 mana, and it deals 5 damage randomly split among all enemies. This isn't great, I don't think. It obviously gets better if you use it with spell damage, but the problem is that you're dealing 5 damage randomly. So it's not like you can do 5 damage to your opponent's face or 5 damage to a particular enemy minion. It just does it randomly amongst all. So I don't think it's going to be consistent enough to be a spell that you want to put into Mage. It's not burn because it doesn't hit your opponent's face if they've got minions necessarily. So not strong enough for me. Curio Collector is a rare minion. Whenever you draw a card, gain +1/+1. It costs 5 mana, has 4 attack and 4 health, and it is the reverse of a Daring Reporter, which actually wasn't too much of a bad card. But I think Curio Collector is actually worse because Daring Reporter drew a card on your opponent's turn, so you were guaranteed when you played it, your opponent would draw a card because they do at the start of their turn. Whereas this, if you played this on turn 5 and you've got no more mana, you're not going to be able to draw a card until the next turn, and your opponent can trade into it easier because the 5 mana 4/4 stats are quite weak. If you combine this with Book of Spectres, then it does have some positives, because for 7 mana you'd get a 7/7. A Luneth obviously has some benefits to go alongside this, but I don't think this is a card that Mage will want to play. It can snowball and it has that potential. Mage does have some good card draw cards now, but I think the 5 mana 4/4 starting point is just too weak. Snap Freeze is a 2 mana common spell, not a great card to be honest. What it does is it freezes a minion. If it's already frozen, destroy it. So this is better than Shatter, which is also a 2 mana spell, and that just destroys a minion if it's already frozen. So this has the extra utility of being able to freeze a minion initially, but it's still not strong enough. I don't think there's enough freeze kind of synergies in Mage decks to be able to make it work. If you play 2 of these, you're killing a minion for 4 mana, which actually isn't too bad, but I'm not sure you'll want to put 2 of these into your deck. Now on to Warrior. We've got the Rabid Worgen, a common 3 mana, 3/3 rush minion. So again, this is another rush warrior card. I think it could combo very well with Woodcutter's Axe, because you can play Woodcutter's Axe on 2, swing it twice, and then on turn 3, if this is in your hand, this could be the one that gets buffed to a 5/4. So that's kind of what you'll be looking for, because I think Rush Warrior needs to create this perfect curve, and this is a good 3 mana card to play there. Is 3 mana 3/3 with Rush on its own good enough? Maybe not. I'm not sure how many Rush cards you'd want to put into your Rush Warrior deck to make it strong. Potentially this one's a little bit weak. I think if you play it on its own, it's okay, but it does need to be synergized with other Rush cards, because if you play this on turn 3, you're most likely going to be trading into an opponent's minion and it will die and maybe not even necessarily kill that minion. Onto Rogue now. We've got Cutthroat Buccaneer, 3 mana, 2/4 pirate, and it has a combo of give your weapon +1 attack. This would go nicely into a Kingsbane deck, but Kingsbane is losing Niger Corsair, and also they're losing Coldlight Oracle. So I'm not sure whether Kingsbane will be around much anymore in the new expansion. So that kind of instantly reduces the effects of Cutthroat Buccaneer. It's pretty good to buff your hero power, but wouldn't you want to play a SI7 agent to do 2 damage to an opponent's minion or face? I think you probably would. And I don't think Spectral Cutlass is a good enough rogue weapon to see a lot of play. So whereas I think this would work in a Kingsbane deck, I'm not sure whether that deck will work in itself. So the first neutral minion to talk about is the Baleful Banker, a 2 mana epic minion which has stats of 2/2 and has the battle cry of choose a friendly minion and shuffle a copy of it into your deck. So this has obvious combo possibilities. So if you decide that there's a really good card that you've got with a really strong effect, you can shuffle it back into your deck and then play it again later in the game. Sounds great. The problem is that you may never draw that card again. There's not many games that go to fatigue, so the chances of you actually drawing that card again aren't that high. Secondly, you don't have any discounts on that card. When it comes back, you do have to play it again, so you spend the mana to play it again. There's already a better card, which is Zola the Gorgon, which you play and it gives it into your hand. So that does give you the immediate possibility to be able to play that card again. So I don't think this is worth it. It's only 2 mana, so it's relatively cheap and you can do it some good combo cards, but not for me. Next, we've got a neutral common card called the Wormguard. It costs 7 mana, 3 attack, and 11 health, so some pretty large health there. And it also has the battle cry, if you're holding a dragon, gain +1 attack and taunt. This card, I think, has got some potential to see play. Immediately, you can see, well, it has to go into a dragon deck, because actually gaining the taunt, I think, would be important on this. Playing a 7 mana, 3/11 has its uses, but I think it would be a little bit too slow. But if it's got 1 extra attack and taunt, I think that's really quite strong because your opponent has to trade into it and it can be a lot of hassle for them. And also it could be a good target for them to use some of their removal on, and then they've used their removal on a 7 mana card and maybe not one of your other big cards. Immediately you think, well, I could put this in a Lady in the White deck because if you're holding a dragon, it would become a 12 attack and 11 health because the Lady in White makes it 11/11 and then the dragon gives it an extra attack and taunt. That is insane for 7 mana. So I think this will find a deck. It just depends how competitive the Lady in White deck is or a dragon deck is. Next neutral minion is a Vicious Scalehide. It's a beast. It has lifesteal and rush, 2 mana, 1 attack and 3 health. I think this card is pretty low tier, to be honest. The lifesteal is almost useless at that stage in the game. If you're playing this on turn 2, the lifesteal is almost useless. If you're playing on turn 10, you're only getting 1 lifesteal anyway, so I would say that's also useless. Where it might see some good play is in Hunter, where you can buff beasts. It also works well with the Death Knight Rexar, so this would be quite, getting lifesteal and rushing of Death Knight Rexar would be quite good. But for me, this is quite a weak card. It doesn't trade into opponents' 2-drops often enough. You could potentially trade it into their 1-drops, but you're unlikely to have lost any health to your hero by that point, so the lifesteal is almost useless. This next neutral minion is called Swamp Dragon Egg. It costs 1 mana, 0 attack, 3 health, and it has a death rattle effect of add a random dragon to your hand. So this eggs we've seen in the game before, and they do see some play occasionally in the right decks, but often they're just too slow. Because effectively here you're paying 1 mana to draw a card sometime, potentially. And the only way that you really can activate it is by using another card with it. So that can sometimes be good. And where I see it having play is potentially in Paladin, because Paladin can buff this with their new one, Sound the Bells. They can buff it also with Spike Rich Steed, Blessing of Kings, all these kind of ways that they can do that. And then when you get the dragon in your hand, it does synergize with the Cathedral Gargoyle. However, all of that doesn't really happen early game, so that dragon isn't really going to be able to synergize on turn 2 when you want to play Cathedral Gargoyle. So I like that this is neutral and it allows lots of classes to get dragons. I just don't think it's going to be good enough, really. Next up is another neutral dragon, and this is Marsh Drake. It costs 3 mana, has 5 attack and 4 health. Now that is insane stats for that value. But the problem is it has a battle cry of summon a 2/1 Poisonous Drake Slayer for your opponent. So basically, if you haven't got anything else on the board and you play this on turn 3, you're paying 3 mana for nothing, because they can just trade that free Poisonous 2/1 into your Drake and it dies. Where this is good is if you've already got a 1-drop on the board and that 1-drop can trade into the 2/1 Poisonous. It could also work quite well with Rogue, where you can hero power on 2 and then use your dagger to kill the 2/1. I don't think it really works in Mage. I don't think Jaina's ping is going to be efficient enough to get rid of it, because then it costs you 5 mana to play a 5/4 dragon, basically, because you pay 3 for the dragon and 2 for your hero power. And if you've got any other weapon equipped other than the rogue weapon, using 1 charge of it on a minion that you're summoning yourself can be quite bad. So In the right decks, this can be insane. If you get the right opening hand, this can be insane, but it might be a little bit too risky to play. Now, this next one, I might be wrong, but this might actually be the worst card of the set. Dark My Moonkin, 7 mana, 2 attack, 8 health, and it has spell damage of +2. So, I think this is probably the worst card. You can't pay 7 mana to put a 2/8 onto the board, even with spell damage +2. It just doesn't seem worth it. But because it costs 7 mana, you can't really play too many other spells with it on the same turn. Lady in White obviously buffs it, but in Lady in White deck, would you really want to play 7 mana for an 8/8 with what's the spell damage for? It may have its uses, but on its own, a 7 mana 2/8 is just far too slow and doesn't seem good to me. Next, a Tangle for Mystic, 3 mana, 3 attack, 4 health. The Battacor, add a random 2-cost minion to each player's hand. This is quite an interesting one, but one I don't think is very great. The stats are okay, and it does have a good effect of adding a random 2-cost minion to your hand, but it also gives one to your opponent, and in Hearthstone that randomness can be so hard to plan a deck around. It could work quite well in a deck that wants you to have a lot of hands, so if you're a hand deck, so like Warlock potentially, or even Druid, this new Druid archetype they're trying to push, it puts an extra minion in your hand. It could also be good if there is some kind of mill deck that works, because it puts an extra minion, a low cost minion in your opponent's hand, and then maybe you could make them draw more cards to make them overdraw, but of course Cold Light Oracle is disappearing. So I'm not sure you would want to play this, I think, unless you're in a deck that wants you to have minions in your hand. Otherwise, it could be a disadvantage depending on what cards you give to your opponent. Hench Lamberg is a 3 mana 3/3, and after your hero attacks, give this minion +1/+1. This is quite an interesting card. If you're playing this in any deck which can equip a weapon on 2, Rogue for example, or if you're playing the Woodcutter's Axe in Warrior, I think you would probably want to play a Rush minion. But then if you get to attack on the same turn that you play this, you're playing a 3 mana 4/4, which is great. And if your opponent can't clear it, maybe you can attack with your weapon again, and it just keeps gaining stats. So this is quite a cool card actually. I quite like it. Unpowered Steamboat is a 4 mana common minion. It has 0 attack and 9 health, and it's a mech, and it also has taunt. This isn't a good card for me. We've seen cards that have high health and 0 attack and taunt in the game before, and they're not strong enough for me. It works really well in the Lady in White deck because, of course, it becomes a 4 mana 9/9. But I think if you're playing that deck, you can't afford to play cards like this because there will be a lot of times when you draw this before you draw Lady in White, and then you've got a 4 mana 0/9 with taunt. Divine Spirit, Inner Fire, Priest decks of the past could potentially use this, but the problem with having naught attack is it really makes it easy for your opponent to grow their board because they're trading into your stats without having any penalties. The only penalty to them is they're not hitting your face, which at that point in the game isn't really much of an issue. So not a good card for me. Not Sprite costs 3 mana, has 3 attack and 3 health, so very vanilla kind of stats for 3 mana. It also has Echo, so you can play this 3 times potentially in a turn. It will cost you 9 mana with the Echo effect. Not a strong enough card for me. I think if you play 3 of these on the board, for 9 mana you're getting a 9/9 worth of stats, but that 9/9 worth of stats is potentially easier for your opponent to clear with an AoE. It works well if you're playing this in a particular deck that likes Echo. So if you're playing it with Hagatha the Witch, then every time you play one of these 3/3 minions, you're also generating a spell. So that would potentially go into that deck, but outside of that, I don't think this is powerful enough at all. Deranged Doctor is an 8 mana 8/8 minion. It's common, and it has a Death Rattle to restore 8 health to your hero. So this is very similar to Antique Healbot, which saw some play back in the day for classes that don't actually have healing. The problem is, and a very key difference here, is that it's a Death Rattle and not a Battle Cry. So Death Rattles mean that you can't get that healing immediately, so when you play it and your opponent's still got lethal, it's almost useless. Secondly, it's quite hard to kill off your own 8/8, so maybe you won't even be able to... You've got an 8/8 on the board, but maybe you won't be able to trade it in and kill it and get the healing. So healing effects that don't activate when you specifically want them to aren't as strong in my opinion, and this card's just too slow on turn 8 to play it on its own, so not a great card. Chief Inspector is a 5 mana rare tech card. It has 4 attack and 6 health, and it has the battle cry of destroy all enemy secrets. So it's a replacement for Eater of Secrets. And actually, this actually might see some play, because if we see Paladin generating a lot of secrets, or if we see it in Mage still, then potentially this will be played. And it has some advantages over Eater of Secrets in that if you're playing against a deck which doesn't have secrets, you can still play this as a 5 mana 4/6 without too much downsides. Whereas the Eater of Secrets was a 4 mana 2/4, which was very weak. So I quite like this card. I expect while it's in the game it will see some play. Swamp Leech is a 1 mana neutral common minion, 2 attack, 1 health. Not a good card, unfortunately. I don't think it will see much play. When you play it onto the board, your opponent can kill it probably quite easily with a spell, and you might not even get any lifesteal. The one key thing here is that it's a beast, so it will go into the pool for Deathstalker Rexar. So when you're making the builder beasts, that's quite good, because just you can get a very, very cheap lifesteal effect onto your minion to put something bigger. So I think really that's going to be the only effect for Swamp Leech. It does have synergies with Toxmonger, because it's a 1-cost minion that can potentially get to poisonous. But yeah, not a great card. Mad Hatter is another rare minion, 4 mana, 3 attack, 2 health. And it has the battle cry of randomly toss 3 hats to other minions. Each hat gives +1/+1. So if there are no other minions on the board and you play this, then it becomes a 4 mana 5/6, which is great. That's great stats. If your opponent has any minions on the board, then suddenly you might throw those hats onto your opponent's minions. So this one's got some pretty bad downsides, but if you can get them to land on yourself, so if you're playing a zoo deck and you're expecting to have lots of smaller minions, then you could probably expect to have at least 2 buffs from this. And those buffs, those 1/1 buffs, can potentially have charge if your minion hasn't attacked yet. So it does have some uses. There were some other cards like this. Defender of Argus is more consistent because you have the guaranteed effect. But the downside, of course, is you do have to have those minions on the board already. This one potentially you could play on its own and it would be strong. So with some playtesting, it might go into certain zoo decks. We'll have to see. Sandbinder costs 4 mana, 2 attack, 4 health. And it's an epic card which has a battle cry of draw an elemental from your deck. So this card is one of these new kind of cards that fishes into your deck for a specific card. So I don't think you would put this into an elemental deck. If you've got lots of elementals, this isn't really the card you want, because yes, you get to pull an elemental, which is great, but the problem is it's not an elemental itself. So when you do play that elemental, you're not going to have the synergy of playing an elemental the turn before. So this one is when you're looking for one very specific elemental that's gone into your deck. So maybe you're playing Lyra the Sunshard in a priest deck. Maybe you're playing Radiant Elemental with priest as well. Maybe you're playing Bog Shaper, or you're playing Grumble World Shaker, for example. There are a few good elementals that you would put into decks that you'd want to fish out with this. So potentially, I don't think it's strong enough unless you are playing one of those kind of combo decks that uses those cards. Even if you are playing a Lyra Sunshard deck, I think putting 1 or 2 of these might be just a little bit too weak, but we'll see. I do like these ones that try and draw specific cards. Life Drinker is a 4 mana 3/3 rare minion. It has the battle cry of deal 3 damage to the enemy hero and restore 3 health to your hero. So this card I don't think is that strong. The battle cry can be really interesting because it can combo with Shudderwock, the new Charmin legendary. Also, the battle cry does deal 3 damage to your hero and restore 3 health to yours, but you're not able to restore health to any of your minions, so it is just health to you, which can have some downsides. Being able to restore health to your minions and control the board is often really important in control decks. In aggro decks, the 3 damage to your opponent's face might be quite appealing, but in reality, having a weak body like this for 4 mana isn't that great and not what you want to play on the board. It's got some interesting uses, and it's a card that can give healing to classes that don't usually have healing because it's neutral. So I think it's kind of an average card. I think it will have some uses, but I don't think it's excellent. Felsoul Inquisitor costs 4 mana, 1 attack, 6 health. It's a demon, and it has lifesteal and taunt. This card isn't a good card in my opinion. The lifesteal is almost useless where you've got 1 attack. It's not really worth it. Having the taunt can be quite good, but And if you play this in Lady and White deck, then you can get a 6/6 for 4 mana. But as we said before, I think you can't play weak cards in a Lady in White deck. They need to be strong enough on their own to see play before you play Lady in White, because you're not always going to draw her. So this card I don't think we'll see much, if any, play. Coldren Elemental costs 8 mana, 7/7. It is an elemental itself, and it gives your other elementals +2 attack. This doesn't seem to really synergize with the elemental effect. So elemental decks don't tend to be able to flood the board. I mean, you can do it with Firefly potentially, but playing 8 mana to give your other elementals 2 attack means that they pretty much have to already be on the board. And it doesn't really synergize well with it. Maybe Frostless Jaina, this could be quite good if you've got a board full of water elementals, but by that point you've already won the game, so giving them extra 2 attack isn't really important. So I don't see a use for this right now, maybe in future expansions, but it's not very well statted and the effect is never guaranteed, so not a great card. Furios Etienne costs 7 mana, has 5 attack and 9 health. It has Taunt and it's common neutral minion. Not a great card. If you play it onto the board, the stats are fairly okay, but it's below average in my opinion. It doesn't have any special effects apart from Taunt, but we've got some much better taunts that have been revealed in this game so far. It's basically just a slightly worse Ancient of War, and Ancient of War didn't see play in Druid, so I don't really see this one seeing play either. And finally, we have the Night Prowler, 4 mana, rare minion. It's a beast, 3 attack, 3 health. It has the Battacor. This is the only minion in the battlefield, gain +3/+3. This is not a good card for me. If you play it onto the board on its own and nothing else is on, even on your opponent's side, you get a 4 mana 6/6. That is fantastic. The problem is, I don't see that happening too often. It's very difficult to make it happen. You could trade in your minions potentially and then play this, but we've seen a lot of cards introduced into this new expansion that have a lot of health. Now, if those decks kind of take off, I think that we'll have more of a game where we're trading minions a lot more often and fighting for the board, and I just don't think this is one that would work that way. If you can play it after a board clear, then yes, it's great. If you play it after a Doomsayer, then yes, it's great. So when the board gets cleared and it comes back to your turn, you could play it, but other than that, I don't think it's strong enough and won't see play. So there we have it, guys. That's all of the cards. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed them. Let me know what you think about all of the cards that I've reviewed, whether you think I've got some wrong, because I definitely will have got some wrong. It happens every time, but I think I've explained some good opinions and I've enjoyed doing it. So I'm really looking forward to the expansion now, and I hope to see you there.